Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session of CMEpalooza Fall. I am Scott Kober, one of the co-producers of CMEpalooza, and I would like to welcome you to our lunch session sponsored by the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning. This session is entitled Reaffirming Our Relevance, Myths and Misconceptions about CME and Implications for Our Industry. Our moderator for this session is Vanessa Senator, who I probably did not get her last name correctly because I forgot to ask her how it's pronounced.
No,
Vanessa, I got it?
Yep.
Okay. Vanessa is the Vice President of Stakeholder Engagement for the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, and she will introduce the rest of our panel here momentarily. But before she does, as we do before all of our CMEpalooza sessions, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. Our gold sponsors, the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Clinical Education Alliance, Med Learning Group. Our silver sponsors, Academic CME, DKB Med, Haymarket Medical Education, Helio CME, Integrity Continuing Education, Medscape Education, Platform Q Health Education, Red Med Ed, and Talem Health. And our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, Antidote Education Company, Bonum Continuing Education, CME Institute, CMEology, Hippocrates, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, Integritas Communications, Iridium Continuing Education, MedIQ, Partners for Advancing Clinical Education, Primed, PVI, RMEI Medical Education, Findigo Medical Education, and Wright Medicine. One of these years, we'll hire that guy who speaks at 1,000 words a minute to kind of go through all of our sponsors, and we'll do it all in 5 seconds. So as with all of our CMEpalooza sessions, there are 2 ways that you can ask questions during today's panel. You can use the CMEpalooza text line to send in a question. The number is 267-6660-CME. That is 0263. Or if you are opening up, if you open up the viewing window in YouTube by clicking on Watch on YouTube on the lower left-hand corner of our live page, you can enter in questions within the YouTube chat function. So our panel will get to as many questions as we can during today's session. So because this is our lunch session, I did want to acknowledge one of our promotions that we trotted out earlier this week. This is the CME Feeds the People promotion. So 75 of our lucky viewers received $20 Grubhub gift cards earlier this morning. So hopefully they can go ahead and splurge on something yummy for lunch and get it delivered while watching CMEpalooza. And special thanks to our event sponsor, that was Hippocrates. So we will be incorporating audience response questions during this presentation via the CME Outfitters audience response system, which is Poll Everywhere. So for those who haven't done so already, you can either download the Poll Everywhere app and join the presentation entitled CMEpalooza 005, or type in the following URL in a web browser, www.pollev.com/CMEpalooza 005. So I think we have about 3 or 4 ARS questions during this session. So finally, please note that the opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or a position of their employer, its parent company, or their affiliates. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Vanessa to introduce herself as well as the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Scott. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I hope everybody's doing well and enjoying the session so far. Before I jump into panel intros, I thought I'd just give a bit of background on what we're trying to aim to bring to light this afternoon. As the healthcare delivery landscape changes, coupled with changing U.S. demographics, there's a demand for innovation and diversified approaches to education development. We know there's importance to out-of-the-box thinking to drive innovation and growth, yet determining what ideas fall inside versus outside that box and who gets to define the box are a matter of perspective and debate. And these are not frequently debated in our industry, and some may contend that recognition of innovation is a measure of good marketing versus effective ideation. So the panel is coming together today to try and understand what these issues are and what their implications are for our industry. So we'll go around and do some introductions. I'll start with myself. So I'm Vanessa Senator, as Scott correctly pronounced my last name, VP of Stakeholder Engagement here at ACHL. Have been here at ACHL for since 2012, and in the CME space since 2005, spanning operations and project management, and more recently in this sort of business development stakeholder engagement role. So I'll move over to Michelle if you want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. My name is Michelle Skidmore. I'm the Senior Director of Educational Strategy with Archimedics. I've been with Archimedics going on 8 years. I've been in CME for, well, I'm not going to put a number to that anymore. But I've been in the industry for quite a bit, and I've been on multiple sides. So hopefully that will come through in our conversation today.
Kristen?
Hi, thanks for the invitation, Vanessa. I'm Kristen Gussick. I'm Executive Director of MLI, Medical Learning Institute. I have been in this industry for over 20 years and can't believe it. And been founded actually MLI in 2005. We're a not-for-profit, kind of a full-service medical education provider, and we have joint accreditation with Commendation.
Celeste?
Hi, everyone. I'm Celeste Kalanko, and I'm the owner and managing director of Liberum IME, which is based in the UK and the Netherlands. I have as well over 20 years within the CME industry. The last 10 have been over here in Europe and dealing with mostly non-US education, mainly Europe, sometimes Canada, sometimes Latin America, sometimes the Middle East and Asia. And thank you very much for the invitation, Vanessa.
And last but not least, Riaz.
Thank you for letting me be on this panel. Riaz Beximus, I'm an Associate Director for Independent Medical Education, Independent Patient Education at Astellas. I've been in CME and IME IME for about 12 years or so. With Astellas, I've been on the commercial supporter side, and I've been on the medical education communication side. So again, similar to the other panelists, I've got a little bit of a variety of aspects in my head that hopefully I can share and impart here.
Thanks, everybody. So with that, you kind of have a background of who's speaking with you today and can hear from their perspective. So we'll jump right into our first sort of hot topic. So to the panel, how many times have you or someone in your organization had a new idea that was immediately dismissed for reasons of that's not CME, no one will fund this, or it's too cost prohibitive to develop? Celeste, can I jump to you first? You can
Sure.
bring that new ownership perspective into this.
Yeah, so I think it's been interesting because to your point, Vanessa, I've worked for a lot of CME organizations, but I am recently now the sole owner of Liberum, and I think it has been an interesting challenge to say, I work with some very creative and innovative people, especially from the educational space, and we get very, very excited about, what could we do? What are the best ways of learning? I think the pandemic was saw a big change. We were already seeing a change in the way people wanted to learn, healthcare professionals wanted to learn, and that's, changed even more so. And I think that I wouldn't say that we get a whole lot of pushback of that's not CME. And I think I'm fortunate in that respect because a lot of the people that I work with over here are not necessarily familiar with some of the more traditional styles. A lot of them came from different backgrounds and have learned the whole CME aspect. So I wouldn't say that that's the problem that we get. But the no one will fund this is probably the second one But most importantly, I'd say the cost prohibitive to develop. And I think that is a challenge that we definitely find is, how, because there is risk in any kind of new education, something that you're going to do. And without that kind of track record of will this work, how much do you want to invest? How far are we willing to go? And it's a question we ask ourselves regularly over here.
That sounds quite a bit about what we do at ACHL too, always asking that question. Kristen, can I ask you from a fellow provider, what smaller provider, what you guys kind of contend with day to day when you think about, as you're going through your educational designs?
Definitely. I mean, we hear that all the time. We work a lot in hematology and oncology. And, there's end of life care issues. I know after COVID, there's a lot of clinician burnout issues, everything, people say, oh, that's not fundable. And we have to find as an industry a way to do those things. I mean, we really do. And I think that a lot of us and our whole industry stepped up during COVID. I mean, I know before we even knew how we were going to pay for it, there were topics like cancer and COVID. And we just knew that information had to get out there. I mean, people were excited to hear about that. So I think we have stepped up as an industry to be able to look at some of those topics that we traditionally hear, this is not fundable. I do think similar to Celeste, and I know you, Vanessa, we also struggle with, and I know we'll get into that a little bit later, some of the kind of educational design ideas that maybe don't have huge learner sizes, but that are hugely impactful. And so we're always doing that dance of figuring out how to do those.
Yeah. It is a dance. Riaz, I know you had brought up a kind of unique way on how some of us as providers might submit a grant.
Yeah, so I picked up on the part of the question that is if the organization is saying that's not CME. And I think the number one thing that we see in pharma is that there are different paths and different avenues to getting support for initiatives. And so I'm going to call them initiatives specifically because they may not be grants. They may not be a medical education grant. And you have to look at it from a standpoint of if there's a tangible benefit or if there's a role that potentially industry can help and can be a partner to the organization for. And if there is that tangible benefit in exchange, then this might be called a sponsorship. So that's the one thing that I bring up is that as your organization is looking at these initiatives and that it may be out there, it may be just seen as really innovative and different, but there may be a role that you might be wanting to partner with industry for it. So it's not like the only way industry can interact is to just give the money. Is we can actually have a role that we are taking place in creating the content, helping shape that direction that the educational initiative is going to go in. So just take a step back. That's the only kind of words that I would have put in there.
I think what I'm hearing too, Riaz, is like get creative. And that's what we had to do too. You have to look for societies that maybe have a mission that can support like some of the communication topics or clinician burnout or things like that. We really, it forces us as providers to kind of look beyond our traditional supporters for that funding.
Exactly.
I think one thing at ACHL that we do is we commit to putting out a non-funded program. That's sort of something that we know there isn't funding available for, but just develop it internally and push it out for topics that still have extreme relevance and might go beyond where there might be some pharma funding for. Michelle, anything to add from your perspective on this?
Well, yeah, and I think that there are a couple of, I'm not sure I'd call them therapeutic areas, but certainly areas of women's health, domestic violence, unconscious bias, and even not so much lately, because I think the the events of the past 3 years have really impacted the inclusion of DEI in a lot of educational initiatives. But prior to that, getting something funded focusing on DEI was a bit of a challenge. And so I think when you're looking at some of these areas that are impactful to the patients, but aren't necessarily tied to a therapeutic agent, is difficult but necessary. And so those things need to be taken into consideration as well.
And I'll jump over. I saw Brian chimed in with a question there, Michelle. Is how do you balance between innovative strategies and novelty, creating extraneous load for learners? How do you prove the planned innovation will actually be effective versus be a shiny silver object? Any of the panel want to take that one?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So, I understand what you're getting at, Brian. I think one of the things that we do and we spend a lot of time do is we ask our learners what they're looking for and what their help, what they need. We just came back from EASD, the European Diabetes meeting, and we had a booth there, and we spent a lot of time talking to people and finding out what they find valuable for them, what's easy, what they like, what they don't like. I mean, to be honest, we found that we were really pretty spot on with a lot of these things, but I myself have an education background. I have a master's degree in education. I have other people on my staff who also have education backgrounds, and we take this into account. But, we spend a lot of time talking to our learners and finding out what they do. We look at our programs to see, what are they spending time on and what are they just kind of, racing through or not. Again, I'll leave tomorrow morning early to be at ESMO in Madrid, and then we're going to talk to oncologists and see the difference between what does one specialty area like versus the other. So it can be nice to think about the shiny object and the new and the novel, but to your point, it has to resonate with learners. And talking to people, I have personal conversations over here because I deal with a lot of people who English is not their first language, and and have very different cultural ideas. And I spend a lot of time talking to people and just asking the question, how do you like to learn? What makes it easy for you? What doesn't? So I think that's the way we tackle that type of situation.
Well, and I think one of the things that actually Brian and I talk about is that learners are irrational. And so being able to build an architecture to support their learning without them really being able to tie it to the learning architecture is critical to reducing that extraneous load, right? And so I think that, Kristen, you're right. When it comes to educational design, being able to reduce that and to take into consideration that, at the end of the day, learners don't know what they don't know, then how can you teach them?
Thanks, everybody. And Scott put up the next question. We'll move on into our next hot topic, and I think this one might even spur some additional good questions coming from the audience. So, whose opinion might be valued more in CME? Is it the learner or is it the supporter? And whatever you feel, what's the implication of that? Kristen.
I feel very strongly about this, so I'll take the first stab. I don't know why it has to be an or. I mean, we're like, in a way, we do investment banking. You've got to bring sides together. And so you've got your supporters who are funding this stuff, and you have to provide value to the learners, right? And then on top of it, I see it like a three-legged stool. You have your compliance. And that's really where I think the answer lies, because it is value to the learner. It is outcomes and important information that the supporter needs. But we all have rules. We all follow it. We follow them. Supporters follow them. So really it's compliance. And so when I was like thinking about this question, I was thinking back to a conversation I had with somebody who was asking, how can you answer RFPs that come out from pharma? Like, isn't that just biased? Well, pharma's putting the RFP out there, but it's our job as educators to independently verify those learning gaps that they're putting in their RFP. If we're not doing that, then we're not doing our job. So I would say it's an and. Oh, I definitely say it's an and. It's not an or. And we have different stakeholders, just like other industries. And it's important to make sure that we're hitting all of them.
Riaz, do you want to talk a little bit about what your approach?
Yeah, sure thing. And my when you ask this question, I go back to something that was a foundational image for me back from about 2009, 2010, Institute of Medicine, and now it's called something else exactly. But there was a convergence of interest model that was for commercial support. And what this had was 4 different circles. The first circle is the patient needs. The second circle is the healthcare system quality gaps. The third one is the healthcare provider performance gaps. And then the fourth one is the business needs. And where those 4 circles intersect is the ideal area for commercial support. So what that really means is that I don't think, as Kristen said, it's this or this, although I'll always say my opinion is the best one. But it's I think ideal that you have to find that sweet spot of convergence of all 4. You can't say it's the business needs and not necessarily looking at the healthcare provider performance gaps. So I think you have to find that sweet spot in the intersection of all of those circles, and that's the, again, going back, it's 2010, so about 13 years ago now, but that came out 13, 14 years. But that convergence of interest model is what I would go back to as a foundational image that would answer that question for me.
Yeah, I think to bring back a little bit of the earlier session today, the first one of the day where it talked about patient voice and patient needs. That's all, that's another piece we need to think about here. So not just the learner, the industry supporter, but how are we delivering something that's going to be of value to and change what's happening at the patient care. Michelle or Celeste, any thoughts on this one?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I would agree there has to be a patient implication to this. It's not just the clinician learner and the supporter, right? And if you're not incorporating the patient into the equation, I think you're missing a huge piece, because they are the, independent variable that doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So how do you teach a clinician to manage a patient who's non-compliant from the beginning, right? So I think that has to be consideration as well.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with what's been said here. It is instead of a 3-legged stool, it is the 4-legged stool, and all those pieces do have to interact. And I would say also that I think that people are starting to see that as, in general, the people that they talk to within the industry. And it is definitely viewed much more as kind of a symbiotic relationship between everybody versus one stakeholder's needs over the next.
Yep. And I think even the last session, they talked about outcomes and the value of what, us as providers are providing back to the supporter, so that they can see all of those pieces sort of summarized in the summary for what they need to share internally. So we'll move on to our first ARS question. And so I'm going to ask the audience if they can chime in here, but which of the following misconceptions permeate our industry most significantly? And if you can rank those from 1 to 5, where 1's the most significant and 5 is the least significant, and I'll read these off. CME is not as effective as pharma industry directed medical education. Live education is more effective than online education. Butts in seats matter more than meaningful improvement. Only certain MECs can do education well in specific therapeutic areas. And the last one is...
Well, now it's in different
I
orders.
think that's it.
It's mixing.
All right. So let's keep changing around here. But it's oh, we got. I thought we had a leader with the live education one, but that got swapped out. All right. So now it seems. Now it seems that butts in seats. No.
All right, we locked it. We locked it.
Butts and seats matter more than meaningful improvement as the most significant misconception. That's something I think we at ACHL quite often are faced with. We do quite a bit of enduring education and online education, and trying to tell the story of what that online program and the value of that and those meaningful improvements are, I think, is something we pride ourselves on, rather than having someone the definition of a participant or someone just viewing. Anyone want to chime in here on what they feel, or any other ones that they feel might be something that we didn't put in as the responses here?
I would tend to agree with what the poll says there. I think that is a bit of the misconception, and I think it is hard and challenging, especially when we're talking about innovation and good educational design. It doesn't necessarily mean a lot of, we call it over here bums in seats versus butts in seats. But yeah, we but that, that, what is your cost per learner coming out? That question comes up an awful lot of times. And I think that is something that kind of, we struggle with that from time to time, figuring out what's the right balance with making sure we get accurate numbers, but making sure that we're getting real, to your point, Vanessa, telling the story of how the education is actually unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
I am seeing movement though. Oh, go ahead, Vanessa.
I was just going to say, Kristen, I know something you and I talked about is that pigeonholing of us as providers in a certain therapeutic area. And I think it's probably those, the first and second one there you're seeing on both sides of that, where once you've delivered an outcomes report to a supporter, can we break that barrier to show, hey, there's more to us than just this one area or this one format even.
No, I agree. I was going to address the first two too. I think on a positive note, I think that the butts in seats, that industry is kind of moving away from that. I mean, over the last couple of years, we are seeing that they care more about, it seems, the quality of the outcomes, maybe some of the reflections, some of the, post focus group conversations, things like that. So I'm really excited about that. I do listen when I'm the provider that they love in a certain therapeutic area, I'm fine with that system. But when I'm not, it is hugely frustrating. So, but I think again, if you're going back to your initial, kind of trying to work outside the box, trying to push the limits, seeing you are gonna rise to the top, and it doesn't matter which therapeutic area. I think that you're gonna get people's attention. So, I do think these are misconceptions, but I also think that it seems our industry is really questioning everything right now. and some of these are being questioned. I think that's great.
Well, and I
So
think
Vanessa, if I can just ask a little bit of a question, Kristen, to follow up on yours. I know we didn't talk about this, so I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
I know, Riaz, I know.
My question, because I personally have a little bit of that misperception of the second one, the only certain MECs can do education in specific therapeutic areas. When you're in your experience, I guess for you guys, and Vanessa and Celeste, you can answer this as well. Is there, when you're trying to break into a new therapeutic area, and it's not just something similar to tangentially similar to what you've done. I'm going to break them into, something like urology and, well, not even urology. If I go oncology and I do
Diabetes.
health or whatever, IBD, fine. So IBD and oncology, they're two completely different things, right? Is there something that is there that's a tip that you can give to any of the listeners here today to really understand what can they do differently that has been successful for you when you're trying to do that pivot of something completely new that you haven't had that success in the past?
Okay, I'll field that first, if you don't mind. I think it really, there's always a risk to innovation. So yes, we might know the hematology oncology space best, but if we're pushing the limits, we are a learning institution. We're going to be taking risks. We're going to fail. That's another thing I'm seeing that's really changing in the industry too, is, having integrity, saying I failed at this, but this is what I learned. And, so I think that so much of what we do is also translatable outside of this. We're seeing innovations that happened post-COVID that we're kind of adopting into our industry. And I think a lot of those things, as long as you're doing your due diligence, that you're doing focus groups, that you're talking to learners, you are going to be able to span those therapeutic areas more easily.
I would agree with that.
Go ahead, Celeste. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think good learning design, to Kristen's point, good learning design is good learning design. Obviously, you do need to change, somewhat depending on the therapeutic area, and you certainly have to have the scientific knowledge to deal in that area. But I think on top of that, it's also deciding where does our expertise lie, and do we really want to try to enter into a new therapy area that we don't have a lot of experience? And we spend a lot of time talking about that before we decide whether or not we want to do something where we don't have a lot of experience. But I would agree with Kristen. I think that it all comes down to there are definitely some transferable skills and sets across the different therapy areas.
Sure. Yeah, I agree too. I think the only thing else I was thinking about was the risk taking, and it goes on both sides, right? So as a supporter, if you don't diversify who you're supporting, the risk of supporting a provider that might have a successful, whether it's platform or whether it's outcomes design or something that's going to bring value or added value to what you're funding, there's a risk on your side as a supporter, Riaz, right? But also I think it's on us as providers to share success we've had in other areas, and try to find those commonalities as Celeste and Kristen were talking about, and draw that alignment of what you can achieve, even if it is in a new therapeutic area.
So the only other thing I've personally seen some of the MECs come to me with is that they have a unique format, delivery format or activity format that is not proprietary, but unique, that they've been able to successfully implement it in the past. And so when they've reached out maybe to a difficult, I can categorize different specialties into harder to reach specialties and easier to reach specialties. And so if you picked a harder to reach specialty and you have a innovative concept of a program activity, that might be your path forward to say, I want to try it in oncology, or I want to try it in some other therapeutic area. And so that might be the thing that I've seen successfully done by other medical education companies as well.
Thanks.
Thanks for being flexible, guys.
No problem. Just hijack
That's
it.
fine.
That's okay.
Well, I got you guys on the line, you know.
So to keep moving on, because I know I do want to get to a couple of these other hot topics we pow out on here. So have we been successful at helping our industry colleagues effectively communicate the value of CME? Why or why not? And when I think about this, industry colleagues could mean partners and others, other groups outside of the pharma side and communicating things. And I'm thinking about that because of the outcomes discussion presentation that was earlier today, and about that there's different stakeholders that you can communicate that to and what the value of CME is.
I'll jump in. So I think one of the things that we have to do is be able to level set the foundation for what the target audience is. So if you're looking at gastroenterologists that only practice on Thursdays in every other month, then that number is going to be a lot smaller if you're looking at primary care, or if you're looking at sickle cell anemia, right? The number of clinicians that treat sickle cell anemia is greatly lower. And so I think being able to, in the grant request, level set the target audience. This is why the number is what it is. Sorry, Brian. And then being able to then help them communicate that up, right? It's not always going to be 10,000 learners is the magic number, because those 10,000 learners may not be treating those patients. So are you really getting to the right target audience? And this is a conversation I think I've had with every partner every day for about 8 years. So, I mean, I think that trying to get this kind of understanding of what is the right learner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That also feeds through some of the comments coming in, I think, on the YouTube side, and what people are asking is, isn't it the right butts and seats versus butts and seats? So I think you're spot on there. But I think there's value in, right, a program that's maybe knowledge based and getting out there. And Kristen, you and I kind of talked about this too. There's value in being at those industry support, or at those annual meetings. There's value in online education. It's on us as providers who are developing those outcomes reports and reporting back on what that message and story is that's coming out of either of those formats, and communicating that to a supporter, and what they can then communicate to their medical team and their internal stakeholders, so that they really understand that there's value in both sides, but there's going to be different outcomes that are coming out of each of those formats.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this a bit amongst ourselves. We're seeing in medicine much more personalized medicine, and I think we're going to see that as a trickle down into much more personalized education. To Michelle's point, it's not the same for everybody, and that audience, that gastro who's only practicing once a month on Thursdays, boy, they've got a good life there. But seriously, I think that and being able to share that the value is a bit different depending on who our target audience needs and who the target patient is in the end as well.
I think for me, it's really wishy-washy, because there's a lot of money being given out for grants, on an annual basis. So I think that obviously the providers are doing their jobs, and the supporters are able to illustrate the jobs that we're doing internally to get that funding. But I think on the other side of it, because I went back and forth, like you have company-led CE that's starting to kind of grow a little bit. And I think a lot of that money does come out of the CME bucket. So maybe we do need to do a better job. And again, and I know I'm harping on like educational design, but providers haven't always done a great job showing those linkages and tying everything together and having outcomes that measure the learning objectives or the learning points. So I think we still just need to tighten up in giving supporters what they need in terms of what they bought in a grant. So.
Yeah.
And the only other point I would make here, though, Vanessa, is that I think this is building upon what the panel this morning, just a couple hours ago, had made the point on data visualization and the aggregation of aggregating outcomes, and that's really the the thing I really am focusing on trying to evolve is helping our industry colleagues effectively communicate the value of CME. The problem is that I get 10 outcomes reports and they're completely so disparate sometimes that I can't really aggregate them very easily, and that's the challenge. But I think, again, I did take away a few tasks, learning tidbits from this morning's talk, and now I know how to use PowerPoint a little better. So I think that's my evolution is communicating the value of the CME. So we really need to remember that one of those circles that I talked about that we are supporting is the business need. So when we're trying to take an outcomes report and say what was the value to Astellas supporting, or whatever company supporting, that's the business need, and that's what we're trying to get out of that outcomes report. So,
Can I be a little polarizing in poking at that just a bit about not the last comment and not your learning of something new in PowerPoint, because I think that's great, but the trying to funnel all outcomes reports into one aggregate piece. I think what's extremely sort of frustrating when I'm trying to communicate with you all with supporters is our program looks different than a program over here. So how can you compare? And as they're not apples to apples. Yeah. And so a YouTube video views is a value. You're getting content out there, but when you've got a patient piece that actually has, comments, and you've got integration of what those patients, and again, I'm maybe bringing up a specific example about a patient-ed program, but when you've got true data from what those patients are telling you are a problem or a challenge, those outcomes look a lot different. And it's really hard for you to then, go back and put those together. So I hear you. But that's where I think that there's got to be recognition on the supporter side, and even with your medical teams and such, that there's two objectives there maybe, and you can't put those together.
So I'll say that I agree with you that your program is unique and different. However, the one thing that we look at from a strategy standpoint is strategic alignment to closing educational gaps. And so we look at every program that we support is going to close one, maybe 2, 3, 4 educational gaps. It can be a variety. And so one or more educational gaps. So we look at it from that bucket, is that what we're trying to explain at the end is, here's all the programs that we supported, and here are the 5 programs that we supported that were all 5 were aiming to close educational gap number 1. And so how did we do on that? What was our measure to closing that educational gap number 1? And so although your program might be unique, and the patient education, I'm going to say, is already on its own little leg of education, but the healthcare professional education is going to close an educational gap. So how did we measure that we successfully closed the gap? That's ultimately my remit, is that I need to be able to say, what is the impact on the gap that we were trying to close with the education this year or this time period?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, let's move on to the next hot topic. So the larger economic climate has some volatility. Has CME providers and supporters experienced any shifts in funding? And if so, has this been consistent across all therapeutic areas? One piece I'll throw in here, as we know at the Boston meeting, that when this question was asked to supporters, most everybody said their budgets were remaining flat, if not lowering. But just curious, Riaz, from your perspective, and then obviously love to hear from the provider side and seeing, and even Michelle on your side, what you're seeing come through and what's going on.
So
right now.
I think if my experience has been that CME slightly decreasing, not a lot decreasing, but it's more flat than anything else. But I think where some of the shifts happen is that we may de-emphasize a priority focus on one disease state or therapeutic area and emphasize more on the other one. And so it's really to look at where the data generation is coming from. So if our data generation, if we're launching a product or launching a new indication or launching, we've got some new data generation that's about to happen in the next year or time period, then we're going to shift the focus of the education to really increasing awareness or implementation of that new data. And so I think that's the, it may not, if you look at it from an overall standpoint, we might be flat. But if someone is specializing in only prostate cancer, well, they might see a little bit of an ebb and flow in prostate cancer, but that doesn't mean that overall we aren't reallocating that dip of prostate cancer into something else. So I think you take a step back and look at it from, okay, so where are you focusing? Are you trying to reshift your focus and your emphasis on products that are in the pipeline? Do you have something that's going to be launching in the next year to 2 years? And therefore, there's going to be new data and new data generation that's going to be coming out on a more rapid basis. And therefore, you will be potentially increasing your spend in that area.
That's good. Any other panelists want to share their thoughts on this one? And that's okay if not, because we can jump on. We've got like 3 more hot topics that I'm hoping we can get to. Why don't, Scott, we actually shift or move on from this one and go to the next ones, because I think the last 2 are probably more important. So many supporters continue to support and prioritize more data-centric education models like ISSs and didactic presentations and webinars. How do we buck conventional wisdom and showcase the value of innovative programs to meet the evolving needs of healthcare providers while still maintaining the focus of those business strategies? So this sort of hybrids all of the topics we've been sort of talking a bit about today. And I think this will be some good discussion here. Kristen, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think, this is probably one of the things that we struggle with the most at MLI, because going to an ISS is very important. I mean, it's just, is there a different model for an ISS than kind of what we're traditionally doing? But then we keep seeing the same thing supported all the time. I mean, it's important to support an ISS, yes, but does it have to be kind of your same didactic lecture or Q&A, which makes it interactive? It does not, so I think that, but then when we really kind of step back and try to really do some different things, and you really think hard into crafting questions to have learners reflect, or to, and then you do open-ended responses and you get great, or thanks for lunch, or retired, so I think that this is really, I don't have an answer. We're just really struggling with how to meet the needs of our learners without kind of being archaic in how we've been doing it. So, yeah, I don't. If
I don't
somebody else
know that there's the right
great.
answer, right? But I think for us at ACHL, we are trying to do the same thing, trying to innovate on the format at the point of care. So what different kinds of educational designs can we take those learners through if maybe we're not at an annual meeting, but we might, or an association meeting, but we might be getting at education that's in the point of care, and how can we take them through something that's of value that we can take back and that's going to demonstrate those business objectives that supporter. Anyone else?
Well, and I think it's how do you take what's working and make it better, and that's easier said than done, right? But I don't see ISSs going away. In fact, I think that there's been a bigger push for them since post-pandemic, right? Now everybody can get back together, so they want to, and so there's been this kind of shift from digital back to live, and it'll balance out again in the end. But I think trying to figure out what worked in your online programs that was innovative, and does that then translate to a live environment? And then how can you make the data more impactful from the live meeting setting, to then be able to inform more innovation on the online side. So I think that finding a way to make them work together is the gold ticket.
Yeah. Can we jump to the last ARS question? Because I think this sort of still continues the discussion we were just talking about. So are we as an industry prepared to foster innovation-led growth, or are we too hyper-focused on the continuity of the status quo? A, we're ready to innovate and lead, or B, we're stuck on the status quo. Oh,
50-50 tie, that's where we go. Still 50-50, right?
It probably will be. We'll see. We'll see. Although the theme of what we've been saying is we're stuck on the status quo, right? So we'll see.
We should have asked, which do you want to do? Innovate and lead, or be stuck in the status quo?
Yeah.
Oh, Scott's going to lock it. It's going to be stuck on the status quo.
Well,
so I think I would have picked, I was in the minority as usual, but 31%. I think we're ready to innovate and lead. I think the thing we need to keep in mind is measurement of impact of the education, and increasing engagement, and come up with new ways of doing things. And I think, Kristen, to your point, even about ISSs, I think that we're at a point, and I've actually seen this in what we're supporting, is we might be supporting an ISS at the same conference, but the ISSs are different. They look different. They're not necessarily just that person in the front of the room talking to 250 people or 150 people or whatever it is. I think it's more engaging, and it's utilizing ARS, utilizing case scenarios, going through a patient case scenario, and actually having a panel of KOLs up there and interacting with each other to try to say, what should we do? What would you do in this case? Because sometimes in healthcare, there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's not that simple. Every patient has some unique aspect to them, and that's what I think we need to really bring out, is how would we treat that patient? What is the difference between that patient and the one that walked in right before them, and the key differentiating factors. So I think, again, we have a place that we have companies with expertise on how to be innovative, how to create engaging programs. So this is the time I think the industry needs to lead and come up with those showcases.
All right. I think that's kind of a great segue, kind of to kind of close out the session. So thank you, Riaz, for that. So a few housekeeping items before we wrap things up for folks who do like money, especially free money. We are kicking off the CMEpalooza scavenger hunt today. You just need to go to the website of the special promotion sponsor, which is Skin, Bones, Hearts, and Private Parts, www.skinbonecme.com, and look for the CME logo. Click on it and see what happens. My suspicion is it's going to trigger another Phillies home run, but see what happens when you click on that logo. And for those people who are watching this session, either the live or the enduring version, on the live tab of the CMEpalooza website, we have a link to a short survey to give us a sense of who's watching CMEpalooza and give us ideas for the future that we do use to help plan future iterations of our event. And finally, for those people who are watching this live, there is no need to refresh your browser to view the next session. Just look on our live page and click on the appropriate link. It will start here at the top of the hour, which is about 4 minutes away. So with that, I would like to thank Vanessa and Kristen and Celeste and Michelle and Riaz for joining us today. And hopefully we will see everyone soon.